Hi, I'm Kiri. It's been a while, huh? This video is a part 2, so if you missed the last video where I prepared for the Sealed with a Kiss game jam, I'd recommend you go watch it. But if you're not in the mood, that's fine too. The gist of it is, I set out to make a Yuri visual novel inspired by Hansel and Gretel in 1 month, all by myself. Before we jump into the game jam though, I do have a few updates on stuff that happened between last video and this video. First of all, you may remember that the main characters for this game were inspired by Shumika, a ship from the game Ensemble Stars. And, yeah, OnStars kind of went off the deep end while I was working on this, so it's a good thing Mikaela and Svanhilde are my OCs now. You can tell based on their designs that they're inspired by Shumika, but they're really only tangentially inspired now, so they're mine and no one can take them away from me. Another thing was, you may remember that last video I was struggling with how to do this flipping thing. Basically, I really wanted the game to look like it was a little paper puppet show, so I want the sprites to move around and flip every time that a character changes expression. And I was having a hard time figuring this out. I was using ATL, just literally like changing frames of animation. But someone in the comments did recommend the 3D stage in RenPy, and this is a function that I had never heard before, so I tried it out before the jam started. It was exactly what I wanted, and it meant I didn't have to create any extra images or versions of the sprite to get that flipping effect. So it was working fine before the jam, and I plan to use it. Subtle foreshadowing. Also, I attended a SWAC meet and greet before the jam actually started, and I was approached by a really kind VA who liked my game idea and weirdly enough wanted to voice for me. I didn't have to ask or anything. He just was like, hey, are there any voice opportunities for this game? And at the time, I obviously wasn't planning on doing any voice acting for Hexenhaus, but I was like, hey, actually, that's a great idea. So just a few days before the jam, I decided to open a casting call and added voice acting to my workload, which is very smart of me for sure. Now, here's the schedule I planned out for the jam to keep myself on track. I would do the coding in the first 5 days, then the writing in 4 days, and then most of the rest of the month would be dedicated to art. So for each character, I would spend 4 days doing 2 sprite poses for them, and then I would do the CGs and all the backgrounds in 4 days, and then I wanted to spend some time making custom GUI, and then the voice acting files would be due on the 24th of the month, so I would start implementing around there, not sure of the exact details at that point, and then I would have a few days left to just wrap up any leftover art, writing, coding, and final crunch of adding the music, adding anything that was missing, as well as making the itch page. I had 3 days for that final crunch. We'll see how well I actually stuck to this plan though. Every day of this month, I took notes on what I worked on and for how long. I actually really enjoyed this process. It helped me see just how productive I was actually being. With ADHD, time blindness, and hyperfocus, sometimes I don't realize just how much I get done in a day, and I don't appreciate that work properly. Even besides productivity, it just helped me feel grounded and made the days feel more memorable. So let's run through my notes and see exactly how I made the demo for Hexenhaus. Day 1 was New Year's Day. Actually, the jam started at 11 PM on New Year's Eve in my time zone, but I was obviously spending the holiday with family. On the 1st, I woke up bright and early at 7:30. Not because I set an alarm or anything, my body just kind of woke itself up. I think I was excited. And I was pumped to start coding. As a refresher, this will be a visual novel with dating sim style choices and an affection variable you can raise, and it will also have point and click gameplay, where you need to find different objects around the various rooms in the house. I was so excited to start getting that functionality in right away. But then, I fell asleep again, and I woke up at 9:45 AM. And honestly, that was for the best. I was pretty exhausted from the party the night before. But once I'd properly woken up and eaten breakfast, I actually started making the game. My first priority was to define everything I'd need at the top of the file, such as the moving and flipping transforms, the different screens for each room of the house, and the image buttons within those screens, which would serve as the point-and-click objects. Later that day, I coded a hint list for the puzzles. I set it up so that as you completed each step of a task, the hint would change. Then when the whole task was done, it would be crossed out. Finally, I started breaking the script into different scenes and labels, and I drafted out how talking to Svanhilde would work. I got a lot done on this first day, and I was feeling very proud of myself. On day 2, I moved from the big picture foundation setting to more specific things that needed coding. I went through each task and added the necessary steps and variables to the game, some of which were more complicated than others. For example, some steps are simply click this object to pick it up. But I was also coding the kitchen counter, which checks for multiple variables to see which tasks you can complete there. The cake pan task is also deceptively complicated. For players, it might seem like you just find it suddenly, but the truth is that it can appear in multiple places, and the game keeps track of where you have and haven't checked. On day 3, I tackled what I'm going to call looping dialogue. When I think of point and click, I think of Franbo, and I wanted a system like that where clicking on an item multiple times will give you different responses. But there didn't seem to be a straightforward way to do this in Ren'Py, so I asked some more experienced coders in the DevTalk Discord. They had a lot of interesting solutions, but in the end I went with the simplest one. Basically, I created a variable for every single image button in the game that checks how many times it's been clicked. If you click one time, the variable changes to 2. If you click again, it changes to 3. On the third click, it switches back to 1, so the dialogue loops back to the first description. I tried to do something similar in the demo for Unring the Bell, but I hadn't managed to get it to properly loop there, so it does stop after a while. In Hexenhaus, this system works the way I was picturing from the beginning. I wrapped up all the tasks and major coding things, and I got ready for Day 4, the dreaded bug fixing. During the first 3 days, I had been working based on theory and blind faith. I had not yet tried to launch the game. Now was that fateful moment when I got to see just how many syntax errors there were in my project. I recorded some of that experience, so I'll let past Kiri explain his thoughts. Oh no. This is what real programming looks like. Just giving up on something. Oh no. This sucks. Okay. Reload. Damn. Okay, damn. It's so broken. Why? Ren'Py just like shits itself upon like the slightest error. Like it can't even tell me like, oh, you're probably missing an and here. It's just like, I am gonna die in front of you and change your life for the worse. Okay, okay. Oh. Welcome to another episode of Kiri Pretends He Knows How to Code. Okay, let's... I'm gonna have a headache. This one actually is jump. Just like I'm gonna jump from a cliff. I gave this whole speech about like, I'm not gonna use if statements. I can just interpolate within the jump statement and it'll take you exactly where you need to go. The fuck it will. You know, you live and you learn. Rolling around at the speed of sound. Sorry, I just watched the Sonic movie, like, what was that, like last week? What do you guys think of Sonic 3? Did you see it in theaters? I guess this is a Sonic 3 review now. Okay. Will this break? Fuck! Now we should be good. Supposedly. I'm just gonna quit and reload it. Will it work? Oh my god, it works! Oh my god, it works. It's like, obviously it's ugly because I haven't like made it pretty, but it fucking works. I wanted the spacing between these, and I don't know why there is no spacing between these. On the... Here, I can actually open the screen again. No, I can't. No, I can't, because it's modal. God damn it. Will this break everything? Maybe. Okay, oh yeah, earlier I clicked on like 2 jars and it just automatically... Oh, shit. Right, so the game was pretty broken when I stopped recording, but thankfully I was able to fix the major issues that same day. See, I had my whole game set up around the concept of traveling between screens, but I had tried to accomplish that using the show function from within the current screen. Essentially, this was causing Ren'Py to keep the first screen open and running and use that as the point of interaction, while other screens were simply layered on top of it. In order to fix the functionality and get the variables updating correctly, I instead had the game hide the current screen and jump to a label that controlled the screen I wanted to open, if that makes sense. So each screen is only called once in the entire game under its dedicated label, and all other related interactions simply jump to that calling label. Oh, and I wanted to clarify the interpolated jumps, since that was something I harped on in a previous video, but strangely didn't work when I actually tested it in that recording. You can interpolate while jumping to a label, it's just written differently. Here is how you interpolate most of the time in RenPy, and here is how you interpolate within functions in RenPy. I've been told there are other ways too, but this is the setup that worked in my version of RenPy and in this project. I'll be updating this for an ordinary week at the Higginbottom Manor, so rest assured that the concept still works as intended. On day 5, I wrapped up the last minor issues I'd discovered on day 4, such as flipping certain images and making the spice jars puzzle work more smoothly. Basically, I wanted the player to click on 3 jars, and the game would check if any of the jars were wrong for the solution. If they were, the puzzle would reset and the player could try again. This meant learning how to use lists in RenPy, such as appending and removing items and counting how many items are in the list. Then I deactivated spice jars the player had already clicked until the puzzle was reset, to prevent them clicking the same option multiple times. By about midday, the coding was done. There were some polished things I could do later if I had the time, but everything worked, all the tasks could be completed, and all the endings could be reached. That meant I could start filling in the script with actual writing, which I was super happy about. I started with the opening scene, as I knew I'd need to have it ready early for the voice actors. Day 6 is when I had officially scheduled the writing to start. I'd gotten a little bit done the day before, so I was technically ahead of schedule. I continued working on the opening scene for a bit, but I was kind of freaking myself out. For context, this is one of the scenes I wanted fully voiced, so anything I wrote here wouldn't just be for the demo. It would be the final text. To take the pressure off, I decided to work on writing all the item descriptions instead. Those looping dialogue trees needed actual words in them, not just, "this is a table." However, the bulk of my working time on this day was actually spent setting up for the aforementioned voice actors. I spent a whole 2 hours formatting a spreadsheet I could add their lines to, as well as planning and writing their barks. In voice acting terms, a bark is a short line, such as a word or phrase, that can be placed in the game to help inform the player. It may not literally match what is being said, but it reflects the character's general emotion, or tells the player about what's happening in the scene. So during this time, I planned out what sorts of barks I thought I would need for each character, and wrote 2 to 3 lines that matched each of those scenarios. For Mikaela and the narrator, a lot of those barks had to do with exploration during the point-and-click segments. Barks for examining objects, for finding something useful or completing a task, for being excited or fearful or surprised. I also needed barks for when Mikaela and Svanhilda were interacting. Some were sweet and romantic, while others were annoyed phrases from Svanhilda and timid apologies from Mikaela. Based on all the interactions I'd outlined, even if I hadn't finished writing them cleanly yet, I tried to decide what was most important for the player to know while moving through the game. On day 7, I messed with the spreadsheet a bit more, editing the barks and deciding which were actually essential, as well as keeping an eye on my audition form. I'd been listening to auditions as they came in, but this was the last day for submission. I also finished writing the item descriptions and added the corresponding variables to each object, which was tedious but not difficult. I launched the game at that point and tested the dialogue looping, and it was so fun and rewarding to see everything working. Even though it had been a lot of work, I felt it was definitely worth the trouble, and I was getting excited about how cute the final game was going to be once I had something other than programmer art to click on. Lastly, my final task on this day was to officially close the voice acting auditions at midnight. Day 8 was when I had to make my final casting decisions. It was honestly pretty difficult. I had so many incredible actors to choose from. I'm super grateful that so many people were interested in my silly little game. I'd already listened to nearly all the auditions at this point, so it was just going through them over and over to refresh myself on them and come to a conclusion. After an hour, though, I was sure. I messaged the VAs, crossing my fingers that they would accept, and they did. I'm very happy to present the cast of Hexenhaus. Sky Santa Cruz is the voice of Mikaela.
I got this.
Aki Reed is the voice of Svanhilda.
It's all right.
And Alex Hughes is the voice of the narrator.
Once upon a time.
These guys are so talented and kind. I'll link their socials in the description, so please show them some love. At this point, I made a tiny Discord server for us where I clarified my expectations and technical specifications, and where we could chat about the game. That day, I finished writing the opening, which was great. I didn't spend very much time writing overall, but I allowed myself to relax and take a mental break, riding on the high of finishing that crucial opening scene. On day 9, I wrote all 3 of the main endings, which was awesome. but technically I didn't work very much this day, at least compared to previous days. In my own words, I took a chill pill. Based on my schedule, I was technically behind since I was supposed to finish literally all the writing on this day. I still had a lot of scenes left to write during the middle of the game, but I just needed to get the opening and endings done so the voice actors could work, so I wasn't feeling very stressed at this point. On day 10, I had planned to start working on Svanhilda's sprites. However, this day actually ended up being all about planning for sound. I looked through the music tracks I had picked and sorted them into different scenes, then spent the rest of the day editing and preparing the lines that would be voice acted. This meant adding them to the spreadsheet, color coding each voice actor's lines, and writing out my direction for each and every line of dialogue. I was going to provide direction live on call with the actors, but I wanted to have these written notes as well for clarity, and in case any lines needed to be recorded off call. On day 11, I actually started drawing Svanhilda, and it sucked. It sucked really, really bad. I had been hoping to do 2 poses per character, but it took several attempts and multiple hours just to get a face and torso sketched, so I had a feeling that wouldn't happen. By the end of the day, I had the full pose sketched, but it was agony to get there, and I wasn't actually happy with the result. It had been nearly 2 weeks since I'd tried to draw anything other than 1-minute programmer art, so I was feeling super rusty. Everything was stiff, the hands weren't right, the face was okay, but it just didn't capture the mystical and alluring feeling I had gotten in my concept sketch. If I weren't on a deadline, I would have done a lot more sketches before settling on one to finish, but I knew I just had to make something good enough, so across days 12, 13, and 14, I lined the sketch. In case you were wondering, no, it doesn't usually take me 2.5 days to get line art done, but I was immensely unhappy with everything I was doing. My art was just taking so much more effort and thinking power than usual. I decided during this process that I would just live with it. I'd get one serviceable sprite done for each girl, and completely revamp everything after the jam. I just needed a proof of concept. I spent the rest of day 14 coloring Svanhilda and getting done the expressions she needed. Hopping back a bit, on day 12 I met with Alex, the voice actor for the narrator, and did some live direction with him. I was a bit intimidated since I'd never worked with voice actors before, but I think all the planning I did paid off. I was able to build up my confidence with him. Then on day 15 I met with Sky and Aki. They were able to hear each other's voices as they acted out Mikhail and Svanhilda's lines, which was such a treat to sit in on. On days 15 and 16, I sketched Mikhaila's sprite. Her anatomy was still a bit wonky, but I wasn't as unhappy about it as I had been with Svanhilda. I think that's because I had taken some of the pressure off by telling myself these didn't need to be the final sprites. I managed to line and color her on day 17, then on day 18, when I planned to start working on backgrounds and CGs, I did all her expressions and added a few final touches to both girls' sprites. This was a huge relief, as now all the sprites were done and I could get to the many other things that needed art. On day 19, I didn't have much time to work due to IRL responsibilities, but I did do a rough sketch of the foyer background. As I mentioned, Hexenhaus is a point-and-click game, so the backgrounds weren't something I could half-ass this time. I needed to create environments with many objects the player could click on. On day 20, I started cleaning up my messy sketch so I could line it, and I had a total breakdown. I didn't take any notes on this, or rather, I vaguely remember taking angry notes and deleting them, but I think this is around the time I got severely burnt out. Basically, a month is a long time for me to focus on just one thing. Throughout this process, I had been coming up with so many new ideas. Ideas for my games, ideas for my art, ideas about my life in general, but I felt forced to stick to the calendar I'd drafted for myself. I didn't have time to skip off into the woods and draw strawberries, and that was really frustrating. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but I couldn't do it. On day 21, I cheated. I took a break and drew those dang strawberries. And honestly, it felt really good. It felt cleansing and productive. It was a relief to work on something other than Hexenhaus. Not because I don't like Hexenhaus, I love Hexenhaus, but just because that's not how my brain works. Once I'd cleared my mind, I did work on the foyer a little more that day, but I settled for using clean sketches in the demo instead of fully lined and colored backgrounds. On day 22, I had planned to start working on the art for the GUI. Obviously, the custom GUI was not happening. I finally finished the foyer sketch and made all the clickable objects inside it, and I also did the whole bedroom. Once again, deciding to settle made me a lot less precious with my sketches and allowed me to finish this piece faster than the first. I also got yet another project idea that evening, which I dedicated a bit of time to each day from then until the 26th. That was really fun and fulfilling for me. I got the first stage of it done, and I knew I could come back to finish it after the jam. On days 23 and 24, I finished sketching all the remaining rooms and objects for the point-and-click gameplay. Those were the backgrounds that were 100% necessary, so I was glad to have them done. I unfortunately didn't get to do the exterior shots of the woods and the cabin, since those were just for set dressing. but the deadline was creeping closer. Thankfully, I'd received all the voice lines on time, so tomorrow I could start implementing sound. On day 25, I woke up with some sort of allergic reaction to who knows what, so I took a Benadryl and passed out. That was kind of demoralizing because I had a lot to do and I ended up wasting my whole morning. But once I'd shaken myself out of my stupor, I opened Audacity and got to work. Each actor had sent me their scenes as long files, so I had to cut out the best take of each line and name them according to Renpai's in-game identifier. I used a really helpful YouTube tutorial for this, which I'll link if I remember to. You can essentially label the take you want with Ctrl-B, and even add the Renpai ID in Audacity, then export all the files at once. Even though the process was tedious, this made it easy to finalize everything with just one click at the end. I got through all the dialogue from the opening scene before I went on a little detour. Even though I had made all the art for the game, I hadn't actually implemented it yet. I messed around with the 3D flip to get it working, reordered the point-and-click image buttons so they layered correctly, and generally tested the game. Seeing everything as actual objects and not just placeholder circles made me so happy. Everything was just so cute. For some reason, the thing that made me most excited was being able to open and close the armoire. It was this moment of pride for me, like, look, I did that! On day 26, I had planned to work on any remaining art assets. By this point, I realized that was far less important than the writing and sound that were still unfinished. I spent the day cutting and exporting the lines for all 3 endings, as well as testing the sound in-game. We were getting really close to the deadline now. On day 27, I selected and exported the barks first thing. Once those were done, all the voice acting was ready. Most of it would be auto-voiced using Renpai's built-in functions, but the barks had to be placed manually. I spent this day testing the voices, manually placing barks throughout the scenes I'd already written, and implementing music in the game. Then, on day 28, I continued working on the sound, implementing and testing the music, as well as making it duck when voices are playing. I had an issue here that was annoying me, but was actually pretty simple to solve, so I wanted to highlight it. When playing music, the command in Renpai is play music, then the name of your file. It's the same when playing sound effects, but for some reason the command for the voice channel is simply voice and then the file name. I was putting play voice every time I manually added a bark, so they weren't playing and I had no idea why until I discovered this. After I'd finished adding sound to the parts of the game I'd already written, all that was left was writing the remaining scenes. I wrote for about an hour, adding sprites and barks as I worked. But I had an issue. Remember that paper flipping animation that I cared so much about? The one I tried so many methods to achieve? Well, it was glitching out pretty badly. I think it's because I was stacking so many transforms on these sprites at the same time. I wasted over an hour trying to get this flip to work the way I wanted it, and eventually I got it there, kind of, but even still it just looked so janky and it was so slow. The game was pausing completely until the animation ended, which meant the text wouldn't start to display until the sprite finished flipping all the way around. It was just a nuisance. So, I cut it. I know, wipes tear from eye. I wanted this in the game so badly, but with just 3 more days before the deadline, I decided it wasn't worth spending so much time on. The flip will be resurrected after the demo, I promise you. Anyways, by the end of the day, the game was at about 5,000 words. I still had the romantic scenes and the food descriptions to write, which I planned to get done the next day. On day 29, I had planned to do any last crunch. Instead, I had a lazy morning, then took a nap. Teehee, whoopsies. I did manage to write 4 affection scenes, out of 8, and that didn't include the food descriptions. But that was okay, right? I still had the next day. Oh shit, I was gonna be out of the house for 4 hours the next day. When was I supposed to write all of this? On day 30, I woke up, ate breakfast, and immediately sat down to write in a panic. Between 9 a.m. and 11:30, I somehow managed to lock in and write all the remaining romantic scenes. The first one took nearly an hour, so I was scared I wouldn't make it, but somehow Palpatine returned. Somehow I wrote a ton. I also ended up getting to come home and write earlier than expected, so I wrote one of the food descriptions before dinner. Then from 8 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. with a phone break somewhere in there, I wrote the rest of them, which meant all the writing in the game was officially done. I spent the rest of the night starting the process of adding sprites and barks to everything new I'd written, and I managed to get through all of Michaela's lines. Tomorrow was the submission day, but I still had a few last things to get done. Still, I was nearly there. Day 31 was the final day of the Sealed with a Kiss jam. Thanks to a reminder in the DevTalk Discord, I decided to export a draft build of the game and upload it. This allowed me to create a rudimentary itch.io page and submit my game to the jam before the deadline. A jam submission can be edited later, but if you upload late, you can't retroactively add your game to the jam. So that I wouldn't have to come back and mess with the itch page again later, I went ahead and created the banner and cover images. This also meant choosing a font, which I then updated in-game as well so everything would match. Once the itch page was done enough, I got back to finishing the actual game. I sketched my one and only CG, the kiss. May I remind you, a visual depiction of a kiss is literally the only requirement of this jam, and I drew it on the day of submission. I'm not proud of me either. I added the CG to the game, finished adding Svanhilda's sprites to the dialogue, and was ready to test the game. I checked for sound, animations, and made sure the endings could actually be reached. I noticed the dialogue tree for Svanhilda wasn't actually changing because I had just forgotten to update the variable each time, so it's a really good thing I checked. I added one of the backgrounds to the main menu as well as playing music during it so players would know their sound was working. Then I remembered I still needed to make the credits. I ripped this code wholesale from Unring the Bell, just showing screens full of text on a black background. The Japanese characters and the composers' names weren't showing up, so I used phonetic transcriptions instead. I do hope they forgive me. That was the last thing I fixed, and then at 4:06 p.m. I compiled the game. And finally, at 4:13 on January 31st, I finished uploading the demo of Hexenhaus to itch. It was now public, available for anyone to download and play. The link to Hexenhaus is in the description. It would mean the world to me if you played it and gave it a rating. Let me know what you think of the demo so I can improve it for the final game. Oh, that was a lot, but I can't just drop a game into the void without reflecting on it. So, remember that calendar I showed you at the beginning of the video? How does that compare to how the month actually went? I started out pretty strong, but soon everything started leisurely pushing everything in front of it along. That really adds up. I also ended up going back at the end to finish things I didn't get done in the original time allotted, especially the writing. Still, the only section I totally omitted was the GUI. Technically, everything else got done eventually. Kind of. On that note, I wanted to see just how badly I overestimated myself. So to recap, here's everything I wanted to get done during the jam. In terms of coding, point-and-click gameplay, 5 tasks that had multiple steps to complete, and flipping and moving sprites to emulate a puppet show. I got nearly all of this done except for the flipping, which technically worked but was scrapped. In terms of writing, a long opening scene, 3 main endings, multiple dead ends, 1 to 3 lines of description per point-and-click object, 8 romantic scenes with Svanhilda that contained 3 dialogue choices each, and yummy descriptions for all the food you made throughout the game, 9 dishes total. Again, I did get all this done, except I only wrote food descriptions for the main tasks, not the optional romantic scenes. That was partially for time, and partially because it just ended up making more sense not to interrupt the scenes. I would call this a success, I just wish so much of it hadn't been so last minute. In terms of voice acting, I wanted the opening and all 3 endings to be fully voiced, and I wanted to have around 15 to 20 barks per character that I could use throughout the game. This was a success. Of course, all I had to do was write the lines, direct the actors, and add their work into the game, but I'm still glad I was able to organize everything and get this done. However, I did wish I had time to do some audio engineering, as all the voice actors have different volume levels. In terms of art, 2 sprites per character, 5 room backgrounds with point-and-click objects, 2 plain backgrounds, custom GUI art, 2 CGs for the kiss and the scene leading up to it, and a CG for every ending in the game. This is obviously where I didn't meet my full expectations. I only got 1 sprite done per character, and they were the only art in full color. I didn't draw the 2 plain backgrounds or the custom GUI at all, and I only got a quick sketch done for the 1 required CG. I did the bare minimum to get this game done, and honestly, I'm okay with that. It's a demo after all. I consider this less a failure of getting the work done and more a failure of planning. There's just one more thing I want to check before we move on. How much time exactly did I spend on developing Hexenhaus this month? Here's a breakdown according to my notes of the time spent on each type of task. Writing and coding had about the same amount of time dedicated to them, but I was surprised to see just how much time went into the audio. 24 hours seems absurd. I actually went back and calculated it again because it just sounded like way too much. But thinking back, it's not so far-fetched. Those 24 hours included selecting music, setting up the spreadsheet for voice actors, meeting with them on voice calls to record, cutting up their files, and implementing all of that into the game. And of course, the art took the longest of all, just shy of 30 hours according to my time-lapse footage. That doesn't include the scrapped attempts at Svanhilda, so it probably really was 30 hours. But how about the grand total? In the month of January, here is how many hours I spent working on Hexenhaus. 94 hours. If I divide it by 4, that averages out to a 23-hour work week. That's like a part-time job, and that does pretty much describe how I handled it. I think I was actually expecting it to be a bit more considering just how much I got done. But now that the hard facts are out of the way, I just want to share my personal thoughts on this game jam experience. I still overestimated how much one person can get done in a month. I'm glad I was able to get the demo done, and I do truly feel that both the coding and writing are 95% done, just needed minor tweaks and edits. However, the art was where I fell short, and that really wasn't fun to experience as an artist. I want to update everything, not just upgrading the backgrounds from sketches to full renders, but even redoing the character sprites. They're serviceable, and other people have told me they like them, which I really do appreciate, don't get me wrong. But I was just in such a bad mood while making them. I felt they were rushed, and I don't want to look at the finished game and wince when I see them. I want to give myself another chance to get the sprites right, but I'm not on a time limit. On that note, I doubt I'll be doing any more solo game jams. I definitely still want to continue as a solo dev because I'm very protective of my ideas. I want to have control over every aspect of them, and I usually have a very clear image of all those parts, so I don't want to micromanage another dev until it fits my vision. I also want to continue doing game jams. They're fun challenges, and a great way to ensure I come out the other side with something. That may be a simple one-off game, or a minimum viable product I can continue to work on. But I can't in good conscience force myself to do more solo game jams. I was just upset when I couldn't get things to the level of quality I wanted. Also, I'm severely ADHD, so being tied to just one project for a month was kind of torture. I wanted to hop around and work on different ideas, but knew I didn't have the time. In the future, I'll join or form teams to create games with less personal stakes. My dream projects will be done solo, but without such strict deadlines. Let's end on what I was happiest with, to keep things positive. Learning point and click was super cool, and I'll be implementing it in future updates to Unring the Bell. I always pictured UTB being point and click, so I'm excited to make that a reality. Actually, I kind of realized while working on Hexenhaus that it was just a better version of the gameplay in UTB, which was funny. Apparently I like searching rooms for items as a mechanic. Also, working with VAs was so fun. I was super scared to direct at first, but I think it went well, and the actors are amazing. So far players have enjoyed that extra touch, so it was definitely worth it. I would love to do it again. Even though technically I failed at some of what I planned, I would still call Hexenhaus and the Swak Jam a success. I got the dang thing done, and I think it's honestly really great. I'll be giving it a last coat of paint in the coming months, but that will really only serve to highlight what already shines in the demo. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking around. If you'd like to hear about my previous solo game jam, you can watch this video. Or if you'd like a much more chilled out game dev video, watch me concept a game idea here. I also hit 1,000 subscribers while I was writing this video, so I just wanted to say thank you so much. Until next time, this is kirigaya.pnk, shutting down.